Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2013. In this section we're going to look at the critical path for a project. So first of all, what is the critical path of a project and why is it important? The critical path is the set of tasks that must be completed on schedule for the project to be completed on schedule. Even with a project that's not particularly big, there are usually some tasks that could be delayed without affecting the overall end date or duration of a project. But there's also a set of tasks that can't be delayed, and that set of tasks is the critical path, and it's normally a sequence of tasks going from the beginning of the project right through to the end of the project. And with virtually every project you deal with, it'll be important to know what the critical path is. And the first thing we're going to do in this section is to see how to identify the critical path of a project. Now what I've done is to add a few more details to our building project. So I've added some subtasks under lay foundation and some subtasks under build walls and under fit roof. So I've still got my 5 summary tasks, but each of them now has a number of subtasks. And if I expand each of those, you see that the project is beginning to grow in size. On the Gantt Chart Tools Format tab, one of the options is a checkbox in the bar styles group for critical tasks, and if you click on this checkbox you will show the critical tasks of the project in red. So click there and you can see that everything under prepare site, everything under lay foundation, everything under build walls, it's all red, which means they are all critical tasks. If I go down to the bottom, everything under fit roof is critical as well. In fact, the only tasks that aren't critical are the fit windows and doors task. Now in words, the reason for that is that in effect fit windows and doors happens in parallel, according to this schedule, with the task of fitting the roof. And because the fitting a roof task takes longer, the fitting doors and fitting windows tasks could take a little longer than we intend without having the overall project delayed. Now of course at this stage I'm still looking at a version of this schedule where I have resource over allocation issues, and if I now level the resources, let's see if my critical path changes. So I'm going to go to the resource tab, I'm going to say level all. It levels the tasks for the carpenter, who was the only over-allocated resource, and those tasks are still blue. So the red tasks, the ones that were critical, are still critical, and the blue tasks, the ones that were non-critical, are still non-critical. Now it's very important to know at any time when you're working on a project which the critical path is and which the critical tasks are, because they're the ones that you must complete on schedule in order for the project to finish on the currently planned finish date. Whereas for the non-critical tasks, such as ground floor doors here, we've got what is called slack. We can actually have a certain amount of delay on that task without delaying the overall project, and it's slack that we're going to look at next. Now again, if I go to the Gantt Chart Tools Format tab and look in that bar styles group, there is a checkbox there which can show a line to represent slack in a task. Now let's enable slack in this view. For each of the critical tasks, the red ones, there is no slack. But if you look at, say, this blue ground floor doors task here, you can see a little line coming out of the bottom of it. That line denotes the slack. And basically all 4 of those blue tasks have slack that takes them up to a deadline. Effectively it's the deadline that would correspond to the point that the roof is finished. So right up to the time that the finishing of the roof is done, which on the current schedule is the end of the building of the house, those could be delayed right up until then without affecting the end date. So we're basically working on the principle that, say in the case of ground floor doors, there's quite a lot of slack available there, and in the case of this one, ground floor windows, quite a bit of slack as well. The others have less slack. Now, apart from showing slack like this on the Gantt chart, don't forget you can always show in the table that sort of property of a task. So let me just right click here on task work, do insert column. Let me just scroll down here, and one of the fields is finish slack, and you can see what the finish slack is for each of my non-critical tasks, how much the finish of that task could be delayed by without delaying the overall finish of the project. So again, a very useful way to use the ability to customize the shown table to show the numbers that correspond to the bars in the bar chart there in the Gantt chart that show the available slack in each of those non-critical tasks. Now, if you have a very big project, it can be quite difficult to see all of the critical path in view at once, and you may have odd critical tasks all over the project. Apart from the ability to flag the critical tasks by showing them red as we did here, another thing you can do is to use a filter in the Gantt chart. And in fact, filtering in general in a Gantt chart is a pretty useful thing to be able to do. So what I'm going to do here is just switch off the slack in the Gantt chart for the moment. And what I'm going to do is to go to the View tab, and in the View tab, one of the groups there is the Data group. We already looked at tables in the Data group, but we also have here the ability to filter. Now at the moment no filter is applied, but if I want to just show specific tasks in this Gantt chart, I can apply one of the standard filters. Click on the drop down to the right there for a standard filter, and one of the standard filters is critical. Amongst the other filters we have tasks that are active, ones that are in progress at the moment, tasks that are completed, tasks that are not completed, ones that are currently running late, milestones, summary tasks, a number of others, and you can actually create filters of your own. But at the moment we're just going to look at critical, and we'll be dealing with one or two of those other filters later on. So let's just show the critical tasks. Now what that then means is that we lose the non-critical tasks and we can identify just the critical ones, and you can see the sequence of those through the life of this project. So although I only have some of the tasks for the house building project here, I've got enough really to talk about the fundamental work that we're going to do over the next few sections of the course. Typically in a situation with a project like this one of our objectives will be to shorten the critical path. We currently start work on a certain date. Let's bring up the timeline, which will tell us that currently we start on April 2nd and we finish on June 5th. And one of the requirements we may be given is we want to finish that by the end of May. Now, how can I shorten a critical path? And shortening the critical path is something that a project manager will do quite a lot when they're using Microsoft Project. Now there are a few basic possibilities, but if we start at the very highest level of possibilities, given the critical path as it is now, you can either shorten some of these tasks. So a task like demolition, 5 days, could I do it in 4 days? A task like footing and slabs, 3 days, could I do it in 2 days? And so on. And by reducing the duration of the tasks, I can reduce the length of the critical path, or I can change the relationships between the tasks. Generally speaking, at the moment none of these critical tasks overlap each other. But is the process of building this house such that some of these could overlap each other? Could I start building the upper floor walls before I finish the ground floor walls? Some of these questions are sort of theoretical questions in a way, and you might well say, well, how can you possibly start building the upper floor walls before you finish the ground floor walls? And some of them may be a combination of theoretical and practical, in that you might say, well, in fact you could, but what if you've only got one bricklayer? You can't do both, so maybe your resources will constrain what you can do anyway. And it's very difficult to generalize about what can and what cannot be overlapped. But if we look at this particular building project, which is what we're going to do a little bit later on, we can look at specific tasks within it, and based on what needs to be done and based on the resources that we have available, we can look at opportunities to overlap some of the tasks. So we've got making the tasks shorter, and we've got overlapping the tasks. Now when we talk about making tasks shorter, it isn't only about reducing the amount of work. It's often more about reducing the elapsed time for tasks. So it might be 5 days work, but could we do 5 days work in 3 days? And then we look at options like, what about working overtime? So in each of these situations there are very practical considerations, and there's usually at least 2 or 3 different approaches to achieve a specific objective. So having identified the critical path in our project now, let's start looking at some of the ways that we can reduce this critical path. Before we do that though, we need to look at a very special kind of task, which is a milestone. And that's what we're going to look at in the next section. So I'll see you then.